and welcome to a live Customer Futures conversation. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Jon Evans from Digidentity. We'll do introductions in a second, but we're going to be talking about a new way to think about employee risk. A lot of the way we think about employees at the moment is inside the organization, how they're moving around, the systems they can access, log in, that kind of thing. But of course, today is more digital than ever. It's more remote than ever. We've got many more suppliers and contractors coming in and out the organization. And so we need to know who's doing what. And when your employees are acting outside the business, we need to think about how we manage that employee risk, especially when they're doing this OBO thing on behalf of, when they're signing contracts, when they're taking part in, for example, a joint venture. So we're going to talk more about OBO in a minute and why it matters to organizations and what organizations can do about it. Before we dive in, I'm going to introduce us to Jon and the organization he works for, Digidentity, who, before he jumps in, has got, I love this fact, 250,000 businesses who rely on their services. That is a pretty astounding number, because it means this isn't just experimental and interesting digital ID, but this is large companies all over the world who rely on signing and identity services. And so this is bulletproof, international grade digital identity. So with that kind of setup, Jon, do you want to talk a bit about Digidentity? And I'd love you to dig into a little bit how you got here, your the history of the roles you've had and your role now at Digidentity.
That's a proper identity question, isn't it? So straight off the bat there. And I do love that stat about 250,000 corporate customers, especially when someone else says it. We can dig into that in a bit more detail. But yeah, I mean, like many people in our industry, I kind of came into it a little bit by accident. And as you were just introducing that question, you probably don't know this, but I actually did my postgraduate I wrote my postgraduate thesis on the identity of Britishness. So it was probably inevitable that I'd end up in an industry talking about identity in a very different kind of concept or strand of identity. But I had a lovely job writing tenders for a big business process outsourcing company. And then I was persuaded to join Post Office, which would have been about 15 years ago, to head up their bid function, which I was extremely excited about. And after about 4 weeks, they changed strategy, downscaled the department. My director and boss left, and I was thinking, oh great, what a brilliant decision, what a career disastrous decision this was. So I was bumping around there for a while, and then the head of department said, the lady who was heading up this weird thing that no one could really understand in Post Office. You got to understand, Post Office was very much the front office of government. That was the department I was working for at the time. It didn't have any kind of digital credentials in the sort of sense that we'd understand it. It was very much bricks and mortar and 400-year-old British institution, trusted, government sort of focused. But there was this weird sort of thing kicking around, in the sort of shadows. And the lady who was running it went on maternity leave. And my head of department said, who have we got that can run this? We've just made loads of people redundant. Oh, Jon's still here. Jon, do you fancy a go? And of course I said yes. And it was one of those really strange moments in all of our careers. It was that kind of fork in the road. And I was so grateful for it, looking back on it. And at the time, as I was saying, we were building out this concept of digital identity and Post Office being a player in this new digital market. And we had a partner called Digidentity. And Digidentity is a Dutch company specializing in digital identity and various other things. And they provided a managed service for us. And together we kind of built the proposition for, as you'll remember it well, Gov.uk Verify, which was the old identity scheme that ran for, crikey, must have been 8 years in the UK and was disbanded, I think, finally in April 2024. It was a massive success story for Post Office and also for Digidentity, even though it is a bit of a toxic brand name when it's sort of spoken about today, as is Post Office, funnily enough. But I ended up sort of, I guess the phrase is the poacher turned gamekeeper. So I went over to Digi to look after, or to try and expand their business in the UK and more broadly, about almost 7 years ago. And I've been doing that ever since. And you said, explain a little bit about Digidentity. So I think we're about 17 years old, coming up to 18 years old now, started by an entrepreneur called Marcel Vent. And I always describe as doing sort of three things. So personal identity, so the manifestations of that would be sort of the KYC, AML kind of stuff. Right to work, if you're watching this from the UK, it's a big use case over here at the moment. Business identity, so which is actually really relevant to the conversation that we'll get into in a moment. So proving that it is a real organization, a real business, a real entity, binding the employee to that company and then authorizing them to transact. Jamie, it's OBO. It's OBO V1, right? And then digital signings. So we're a qualified trust service provider. So we can, I don't want to sort of teach your audience to suck eggs, but there's three tiers of signing. There's simple, advanced, and qualified. Qualified is the gold standard. We can issue certificates up to that standard. And the really interesting thing about QES, and the reason why it's my favorite product in our portfolio, is that it has the legal equivalence to a handwritten signature. And this is a little known fact. You can sign with a QES and it has the same legal validity as the way we still do 99% of our kind of signing transactions. It's kind of crazy that we haven't all got a signing certificate on our phone. And that's kind of mission number one for me at the moment, really, is to sort of make that ubiquitous and, accelerate the adoption of that. There are various reasons that sort of makes that tricky. It's not a technology problem, it's a people problem, and it's a behavior problem, like a lot of the stuff that we're doing. And the other really interesting point that I know if I missed, you'd steer me onto, is that it reverses the burden of proof. So in the court of law, if you have signed something with a QES and that signature is challenged, the relying party is protected. You have to prove that you did not sign that document. Any signature, any digital signature below that standard, the relying party has got to say, no, you did sign it, and go to court. And actually, we would be obliged as the certificate authority to give evidence, etc. So it becomes very messy when challenged. QES protects the organization. It's the gold standard. It has that legal validity. So that's kind of, in a very quick nutshell, that's 15 years of Jon Evans, my identity, and the identity of the company I now work for, Digidentity.
Brilliant.
What have I missed? I'm not sure.
No, it's fantastic, and I want to set that context, because when we start talking about these, fancy new things about portable authority and on behalf of, OBO as a framework, I think it's really important to say this is not just about identity and saying, oh, it's definitely Jamie, right? We need to stitch together. It's definitely Jamie, and Jamie's allowed to do these things on behalf of this company. So we need an organization ID, we need an individual identity, and we need to know the context in which they're doing something. So that for me is where we've kind of started talking about OBO is a really interesting way to think about the problem, but also kind of stitching together the things you've been doing as in the market for quite a while.
Totally right. I am finishes at the door of the business. What we're talking about with OBO is the bit that exists outside. So it's the bit that takes the authorization beyond the boundaries of the VPN or of the front door. And I think that's the really interesting distinction when we start to sort of explore and flesh out what you and I and what others are talking about when we talk about OBO on behalf of. I mean, it's an extension of IGA and SCIM. So one of the things that we do, and we've got, I can't say I am head of global sales because I don't look after the Netherlands, but I look after everything else. In the Netherlands, we signed up for the top four banks, so Rabobank and ABN AMRO and ING and etc. And we have a IGA SCIM integration, which obviously is a brilliant sort of connector, a brilliant sort of meeting of traditional IAM and some of the other things we're doing with wallets and identity and stuff. What we're talking about with OBO and that category and credentials is the authorization piece that allows that business or allows individuals in that business to represent that company outside of the boundaries of the organization.
I want to say all that again in slow motion. That's really important. So inside the organization, there's identity and access management tools, IAM tools, that are really good at working out who's logged in, who is who, employee identity, right? That's a really well-established space. And there's, as you said, IGA and SCIM are tools so that when employees move around, we can manage their authority and permissions and access to different systems. That stops at the company boundary. Like when they start working, let's say it's a joint venture, and they start working with an organization, can they sign the document for the company? Can they represent the company in government meetings? Are they entitled to? And then if something goes wrong and there needs to be an audit, how is it handled? So I think this is, it's a new area of employee risk that we can start to handle with these digital tools that we didn't have before. And I suppose one of the examples I like to think of is, imagine you've got a senior project manager, let's call her Alina. She's been in the role, she's signing contracts, she's doing everything she should. She then leaves, right? She decides it's time to move on. She's been there a while. 6 weeks later, a supplier that they've been working with makes a minor amendment to a contract. That kind of comes in, but it doesn't hit her inbox because it's been redirected to a team inbox. They need to get the work done, so somebody in the team kind of approves the minor amendment, and it's all fine. The project continues, but then later there's an audit or a legal challenge, and they're saying, "Well, who signed it?" And the supplier might say, "Well, it's valid because someone in the team signed it," but the organization A can't prove who. So we know who's in the team, we know who has access to who logged in, but do we know who's exactly got what authority at what point? And so this is where I think there's a really interesting point about I am outside the organization, and we talked about this the other day. It's a gap that could be exploited, right? It's that thing where what if actions could, if we know that these gaps exist, what if other parties can start to take advantage of it and start signing things on behalf of the organization?
Totally right. And with your example of Elena, it's an accident. It's an accident of the tools and the systems that are using. You can understand it. There's no ill intent, I think, in the example that you've just posited, but it is a gap that could be exploited.
Maybe you could talk a bit about those three different elements, and QES is qualified signatures that he says the highest level is a good example where we're binding the organization and the individual, and the context is signature. But maybe talk about those three parts of it: the organization, the individual, and then the context that is relevant for the transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about OBO, the way that we've kind of framed it is exactly that. We always talked about it as a triangle, didn't we? So you've got you got to know who the organization is, you've got to know who the person is, and then you've got to know the kind of context, and then you've sort of the scope and the time and the kind of parameters in which they can operate. Sort of like the authority, what authority do they have, I guess, is the question there. The way we do it in Digidentity, I'll tell you what, I'll put this in, I'll loop it back to e-herkenning. So e-herkenning is e-recognition in English, Dutch scheme, business to government. So the way we do it for e-herkenning, I'm not an expert, but what we do is that we have an API, a link to the KVK register, which is the Chamber of Commerce register, the business register in the Netherlands. So we validate or verify the business, and then we verify the ultimate beneficiary owner and the directors of the business. So we're binding the individual to the organization, and we then have a kind of chain authorization flow that allows those directors to then say, right, Jamie's our finance officer. He's now got permissions to do X, Y, Z on behalf of, Digidentity, let's say, to transact and talk to government. It's a huge sort of business line in the Netherlands. I think we're one of the top two players, but it's exactly that. It's OBO is those three things. It is the context, or the knowing who the organization is, knowing who the person is, making sure that they are bound, and the context in which they're transacting in. And it's kind of as simple as that. There are all kinds of different other versions, as I sort of think about it, that we currently do, and maybe are extensions of QES and what we do for e-herkenning. So I'll give you another example. So we've got obviously qualified electronic signatures. So at the moment we've got a lot of lawyers, particularly in Scotland, I'll tell you why in a moment, but we've got a lot of lawyers in the UK using QES to sign mortgage deeds or property contracts, right? Because, it's legally binding. If that lawyer leaves the organization, they still have a QES, so they're still able to sign in exactly the same way as they could sign when they were working for the company. They may have left on bad terms. They have something, a credential in their wallet potentially that they could potentially, it's hypothetical, but they could actually use to do harm. Now, a way to protect against that would be not just to sign, it's Jonathan Evans, it's legally binding, it's a qualified electronic signature, but actually have what we now call in Digidentity, we currently call it a personal organisation certificate. So in that certificate, you would have signed by Jonathan Evans, qualified electronic signature on behalf of Jamie Smith LLP. So it's bound to the company. If I did leave under a cloud, or if I just left for any reason whatsoever, you would have via a IGA skim connection or any other kind of business portal, the ability to revoke that certificate. So I can no longer sign on behalf of your company. I might be able to sign my own for my own use cases using the qualified electronic signature, but it's not bound to the company. And I think that is, QES is not ubiquitous and widely used as I'd like it to be, but you can already see the use case for knowing not only is it a signature, not only we do know the identity of the person that sits behind it, but we also want to know that he's authorized to sign for a company that he's representing.
If you look across Europe and EIDAS2, we've gone from EIDAS1, which is it Jamie? With EIDAS2, we can start to add attributes. So we can say, is it Jamie? And we can add qualified attributes. We can say, does Jamie, does he hold an attribute or a credential that says works for this employer, has this role? So you can start to see those attributes being given to Jamie as well. And then there's a second initiative around business wallets. So now we're going to have a verifiable business ID in Europe across all 27 states. It's in its early stages right now, but it's being refined and defined and piloted. Once we've got business wallets, which is kind of in Air Canning in the Netherlands, which is the Chamber of Commerce, the business registry in the country. Some countries don't have that. In the UK, our business registry is not quite as clean,
robust,
and robust as it should be. They've only just, as of November, made directors of companies prove their identity.
Yes.
Right. That's only just now come in. So you could create a company with an email address and a credit card. So in Europe, we'll be able to say, well, I've got this business wallet, really is this organization. We'll have an employee attestation, say this is Jamie and he works for this company. And then, as you said, we can start doing signing and bring those things together. So the point of the OBO conversation really that we want to have now is this feels like a really important way to think about employee risk, number one. Number two, I think probably 3 years ago, this would have been a bit abstract, kind of an employee, an individual identity and a business identity and bring them together. But now we've got several forces that start to make this feel, longer term, quite inevitable, but short term, possible. That we can say, this is Jamie, he works at this company, we know this is the entity that he's dealing with. And as you said, there's the kind of lovely acronym soup of IGA and SCIM and QES, but what IGA and SCIM mean is that when an individual moves out, leaves an organization, their authorities and their approvals and permissions can be revoked as they do it. It can be automated. And so not just automated so they can't log into the system internally. What you're suggesting, and we're suggesting, is that we can also remove their ability to sign on behalf of the organization. And so these digital building blocks are kind of coming together. And I think OBO, or on behalf of, is going to make sense in an employee context. I have a personal view that I think OBO as a way of thinking about delegation, as a way of thinking about delegated authority, and a way of thinking about someone doing something on behalf of, that should really be thought of in the same way we think about KYC, or as you say in the UK, AML. It's like it's a check we want to go through to make sure that this transaction is legit and safe.
So I want to jump in on two things actually. So let me ask you a question now. How would you define OBO? Because we're talking about OBO. We're talking now. When you say KYC, I know what that is because it's so, everybody knows what that is in the UK, right? Because we've been doing it for so long. Well, I say everybody knows, everyone's got their own flavors of it, but roughly speaking, it's a kind of category, but it's also a credential. So it's a category of things that I know I need to do. It's a regulation, but it's also something, if I go through the process to prove I am to a certain standard, a KYC standard, it could sit in my wallet. Do you see OBO in that? Do you see OBO as a kind of category and also a sort of a verifiable credential, or do you think it leans towards one or the other?
Yeah, I mean, this is where getting specific is helpful. So KYC is a set of regulations, and
Yeah,
actually every organization in the UK would have, they have to satisfy themselves that they've made the regulations. Is it defensible?
yeah,
So their own processes and steps and so on might be different company to company. What we've got to a place now is saying, well, actually, I've got my KYC data that has satisfied me because I've done front and back of a driving license, or someone came into branch, or whatever it might be. So it's both the data objects that we end up with, but also the regulation, excuse me, the regulation that describes what you've got to do. And I think OBO it could end up in the same kind of place as I think you're saying, that I think it's a framework around which we're saying, do we, asking questions, do we know who the organization is? Do we know who the individual is? And do we know what authority they had when they did a thing?
yeah,
I can also imagine that if I've got an identity wallet and a business wallet and a qualified signature, or the ability to do qualified signatures, there could be data that comes off the back of those when you combine them. It could be an attestation or a credential that says this person has the ability to sign on behalf of, or represent, or log in as. So I think
yeah.
it will work at both levels, both at the high level. These are the steps we want to check, but also down below. I'm not suggesting that there'll be OBO regulations.
I just want to go back a sec. A light bulb went off in my head is when we were talking about, when I stopped talking about e-Herkenning and you started talking about wallets. Now, the interesting thing about the e-Herkenning framework is that, as I understand it, it's a centralized framework. It's brilliant. It works really well. It allows people to represent companies to government, and there's loads of those use cases. It works really well, and it's entrenched and understood. But it is centralized. Wallets take this thing across borders, across use cases, across jurisdictions. That's like, that's all I've really got, but it's like, wow, the potential there, the synergy between these frameworks and the advent of the wallets and verifiable credentials takes this to places that I haven't really even thought about.
I think so. The couple of threads in there. I think one is, if there isn't a centralized business registry, we might want to have proxies for that. So there are lots of, just like there's KYC providers for individuals, there'll be KYB providers for organizations. And so an organization could rely on an attestation from one of those suppliers. This is probably this business. And those organizations could issue a credential to a business. The second point you made is it becomes much more expansive. As you said, in the Netherlands, it's kind of boxed in because it works brilliantly as long as you're in the Netherlands. Once we have business wallets across EU and 27 states, suddenly the portability of business information is really high. Onboarding suppliers, qualifications, statements like, anti-slavery, and all the kind of good procurement supply chain stuff is going to be phenomenal and automated and so on. But it's when you then say, well, we've now got this kind of the big boulder of who is the business, we can add all sorts of stuff to it. Like, here are all the employees attached to it, and here's what they're allowed to do. And it becomes very, as you say, much more expansive, much more scalable. I'm not sure we can imagine what's going to become possible. We've believed that it's not about decentralization for its own sake, and certainly none of it's about blockchain or any of that. The EU's not going down that path. This is much more about making the data portable, and we think not just from an individual point of view, but from a business point of view. And then when you put them together, that's when you get a really tight binding between the individual and the organization, but then what they're allowed to do. And that's why I think OBO, what am I allowed to do? My permissions, my authority becomes portable. So portable authority. Who should be paying attention to this kind of thing inside organizations, do you think? Who should be listening or thinking about where the risks are of employees, but also, what OBO could mean to them?
I mean, there are myriad examples. It'd be really interesting to kind of workshop it, with some people on this call. But I mean, in the legal and contractual sort of sector, I was thinking, solicitors signing contracts on behalf of a law firm or a client, in-house lawyers executing NDAs and settlements. You've got company directors signing binding agreements, conveyancing, right to work confirmations, approving IT access for third parties. In finance, you've got finance approving payments for releasing funds, procurement managers sign off supplier contracts. I mean, the list goes on and on. Doctors prescribing medication, pharmacists dispensing drugs. I mean, when you start to sort of talk this through, you can just go forever. There's so many sort of permissioned uses of these kind of credentials, whether it be signing or lots of others, where, OBO is critically important, especially when you start thinking that the sort of facilitating sort of control vehicle for this is going to be wallets. And VCs.
What I love about these examples, even just the medical ones, is that we've now got the tools to say, is it really Jamie the doctor, and did he sign this prescription? Is different to, is he signing it on behalf of this hospital or with this authority to this level of drugs for this level of thing? Especially in a world where we're trying to remove burdens for doctors to have to sign off everything, and we're trying to let others in the healthcare system sign things off, whether it's pharmacists or nurses or whatever. So you can start to see why signing, we're way out the enterprise landscape now, but signing is a really interesting moment where we need to know who it is. And when you combine it, the individual with the organization, with the signature, bring them together, I think, like I said, 3 years ago, it was kind of interesting and an interesting vision. Now it's, I think, possible. We could do it now. But then throw in the regulatory environment, and it starts to look quite likely that these things will be in place in the next couple of years. So qualified signing is available now at scale, and then when we combine it with the things like eIDAS, where we can have business wallets and identity wallets, it starts to feel really, really tangible, I suppose.
It's a turbocharger, isn't it? Absolutely. I mean, you can imagine the scenario, and hopefully not too long, where we've all got a qualified signing certificate in our wallets.
Yeah.
If you're in the EU 27, they'll probably get it before us. But as soon as you've got, it's the chicken and egg. It's that age-old identity problem, isn't it? If everybody's got a signing certificate, then why wouldn't a law firm accept it?
Any other kind of thoughts, comments before we wrap?
No, I don't think so. I think you've probably very eloquently kind of wrapped it up. And it's interesting because, it's here today. People can go out and get this stuff in various different sort of guises. And I'd encourage them to do so. And I'd encourage them to sort of come and speak to you at Customer Futures, or even, with me, and just sort of kick this around, because, I mean, it's a label for something that already exists, right? That's what we're doing. We've given it some sort of tangible label. It's in its early sort of infancy, but I think you're right. I think that this is just going to accelerate and go in all kinds of different directions, and it's super exciting. I mean, you could really use it as sort of efficiencies, and protects the company and empower. I mean, that we haven't used the word empowerment, right? This is a massive empowerment toolkit for employees of companies to go out and do their jobs more effectively and efficiently. So it's a positive news story, isn't it? I think it is.
Well, what a brilliant way to end. Thank you so much. Well, look, I really appreciate you talking about your own personal history, how you got here, us, your expertise and Digidentity's experience in this space, and how you're thinking about employee identity, business identity, and how they're going to come together. And of course, qualified signatures, which are kind of, they're at scale, but not really, people kind of, they don't know about them as much as they should do. I think it's going to be a really important part of how people interact and sign things in the future. So we'll speak soon, and we'll catch you next time on the Customer Futures Conversation.
You bet. Thanks so much, Jen. It's a joy, as always. Take care. Thanks.
Bye.